The next Doctor Who I'm planning on doing is a Jodie Whittaker, and since a lot of people have asked me for my thoughts on her, I've decided I should take a look at her first series before I get to the verbal abuse. Given that at least 40% of my online reputation is hatred for New Who, my thoughts might or might not surprise you. I generally liked it. The show seems to be going down fairly well with general audiences and traditional critics, so all the people online screaming about it have just worked out what it's been like for me since 2005. First off, the 13th Doctor. Though I'm very in favour of casting a woman as a Doctor, and I think it's embarrassing that it took this long for it to happen, I wouldn't have cast Jodie Whittaker. She's classically attractive, young, bland and blonde. She's Davison. I prefer my Doctors to have interesting faces. Usually that means ugly, but not always. To be older and to be almost anything but bland. Whittaker's Doctor is basically a remake of 5. 10 is like a remake of 5 with added irritation. Beyond Whittaker, I'm generally in favour. The show has truly had a facelift for the first time since it returned, becoming a kitchen sink drama with added space stuff. Radical shifts in style and even genre were common in classic Who. It went from an often silly, black and white monster and base under siege show to a fairly serious, colour, spy-ish show between series 6 and 7. The shift between series 10 and 11 of New Who is tiny in comparison to that. But it's there. The show looks different, sounds different, is structured differently, and has a whole new cast. New TARDIS even. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people who had such a visceral reaction to Series 11 weren't reacting to what the show is now, but that it regenerated so much. Maybe the reaction would have been a little less dramatic if the earlier series had changed more. But nah, Series 1 to 10 generally stuck with the same, admittedly successful approach, and as a result change became scary. Anyway, the show looks fantastic. The cinematography seems to be going for a Ken Loach thing to match the new home base in Sheffield. Early New Who often looked like a mid-afternoon kids TV show, practically indistinguishable from the Sarah Jane Adventures. The CGI generally looks more realistic and integrated into the shots. I don't know if they changed special effects teams or what, but it usually looks great. It even sounds good. Not different enough to Murray Gold for me, but it badly needed a change, so I'm fairly happy. Could do with a weirder theme though. It's got possibly the most stunning intro the show has ever had. Generic as hell because it's just a remake of Pertwee's first, but it's beautiful. It's a fun juxtaposition from Capaldi's intro, which didn't look great. In fact, it looks inferior to the test version the fan who designed it stuck up on YouTube, but was the most original intro the show had had in decades. There are traditionally 3 kinds of Who intro. The abstracts, Hartnell, Troughton and Pertwee's first. The Time Tunnel, Pertwee's second, Tom Baker's first, McGann, Eccleston, Tennant, Matt Smith's first, and Space, Tom Baker's second, Davison, Colin Baker, McCoy, Matt Smith's second. With Capaldi, the show got a new kind of intro for the first time since the start of the 80s, an abstract time tunnel, but like I said, it looked a bit crap. Anyway, Whittaker's intro is generic. It's an actual remake, but it's the first purely abstract intro since the 70s and I love it. I'm hoping the next intro manages to unite the beauty of Whittaker's intro with the cleverness of Capaldi's. Ooh, that could almost be a broader point about their eras. But it's not. On to the companions, I generally like them. They don't have some destiny, they're not amazing or whatnot. They're just people going on adventures because that'd be cool to do. As far as I'm concerned, this is a return to the status quo of classic Who, after a decade of attempts to make the companions as interesting as the Doctor. I'm enjoying having 3 companions in the TARDIS. The crowded TARDIS is most connected with Davison, but Troughton also did it. It creates an interesting dynamic, but it does make a challenge for the writers to give them all something to do, and no one's yet managed to crack it. Most 3 companion stories somehow sideline one of the companions in each story, and the short length and New Who stories don't help. The show feels much more classic Who in general, with the regular people companions, the comparatively low-level stakes in most stories, and even the more overt politics on display. I know a bunch of annoyed people weren't happy about that, but I loved it because classic Who was politically subtle as a brick. For example, back in the 70s, Pertwee had 2 stories on the planet Peladon, and both of them were unsubtle riffs on contemporary politics. In one, the King of Peladon had to decide whether his planet will join the Galactic Federation. It's about the UK and what will become the EU. They ended a sequel story based on the miners' strike of the early 70s. I could give many more examples of classic Who in politics, but this video is going to be long enough. I'm sure it'll come up later on. I've not got only good things to say though. The editing is often very rough, as in I'm not sure what's going on at times. Sometimes it feels like 5 or 10 minutes is missing. It's got some holdover New Who dumb ideas like the Doctor surviving the fall in the first episode. But, thanks to Runaway Bride making Time Lords invulnerable after regeneration, and the End of Time deciding that falls don't kill Time Lords, that's apparently acceptable. And it sometimes has its own earlier New Who-style dumb ideas which stick out like a sore thumb, because this is easily the most serious and low-key series since the show came back. The ridiculous shit in earlier New Who felt more at home because the tone that Russell Davies set for New Who was essentially the same tone as Series 16 of Classic Who, i.e. pretty silly.
That's very odd.
This one's making an effort to be a little less pretty silly, to be a little more realistic, so when it happens it's a little more out of place. But enough waffling, let's take a look episode by episode. And if you want me to do this for other series in New Who, please leave a comment, hope I have the time, and make a Patreon request. The Woman Who Fell to Earth is one of the better opening Doctor stories. Not just New Who, but classic as well. It might even be the best in Spearhead from Space, but I'd remind you that most opening Doctor stories are pretty bad. I love the Doctor without the usual crutches like the TARDIS and the Sonic. Well, without the Sonic for a while at least. I like that she did some full-on, down-to-earth, practical science-ish stuff, a la Pertwee in particular. Much better than grabbing some equipment, saying some bollocks and pressing a button that earlier New Who seemed to prefer. Pity she couldn't build a better-looking Sonic though, rather than the tumorous vibrator she ends up with. 13, like a bizarre amount of earlier Doctors, looks much better in her predecessor's outfit than her own. I hate her eventual outfit, but unlike, say, Eccleston's, it's completely Doctorish. It's just vile. Now I know everyone felt when Colin Baker's appeared. I mentioned the pitfalls of having 3 companions, but this is an extra one that earlier stories didn't. It has to introduce all 3 characters and convince them to hang out with the Doctor and tell the story in a single episode. It mostly works, but the companions are left a little flat. The plot's clearly been inspired by the Predator movies, but that's not a problem. Obvious homages and retreads of existing works was common in Classic Who. What is a problem is the villain himself. He's fine and threatening in his armour and unceremonious murder, but when the mask comes off, his stupid face is revealed and the Doctor starts mocking his name and he's officially pretty crap. Unlike with 11 mocking Strax and 10 mocking Banakafalata, I hate the Doctor calling the villain Tim Shaw. Why would the Doctor mock an alien from an obviously human standpoint by calling Zim Shah Tim Shaw? Because the writer didn't even try to put themselves in a non-human's head when writing her. I'm not fond of her going on about the regeneration from Capaldi. They never knew her before, and this is a thing that happens to Time Lords. Why would she mention it at all? 9 didn't tell Rose that he used to look like Paul McGann / John Hurt. They're drawing attention in universe to something that's mundane in universe, and treating the regeneration differently from earlier ones. I really wish they hadn't killed Grace. Have her survive and stay home, and very little changes in the series to come. Hell, they could have made her a regular. We need more companions that aren't young women. I'm not a massive fan of Graham. Bradley Walsh's acting is a little more light entertainment than the others, and it doesn't really gel, but he's a big change from the companion norm, and that's wonderful. 13 manages, somehow, to be even more of an insufferable twat than 10 when it comes to killing. Going into a rant at a poor terrified guy who was barely saved from a fate worse than death for kicking the alien who attacked him to his certain doom. Apart from everything else, certain doom is never certain. And all this is just seconds after 13 did a 7 switcheroo and had the bad guy teleport bombs into his own body. Anyway, the story ends with a killer cliffhanger as the Doctor makes a teleporter to find the TARDIS and leaves them all stranded in space. The Ghost Monument continues to look good. Honestly, parts of this series look more expensive than the first Avengers movie. Check it again, it looks like a TV movie. The story gets off to a good start when half the cast do a Prometheus and forget they can run sideways. These 2 human-looking aliens need to find the Ghost Monument. Spoiler, it's the TARDIS. The whole episode's one long chase, which is an unusual and fairly crap idea to hang a story off. Quick shot of very sad-looking Eternals. I really could have done with the aliens looking a bit alien, and for them not to waste Art Malik. He's playing the evil guy in charge of the chase. Apart from everything else, it's a bit dodgy to have the only Asian alien in a tent in the desert dressed a bit like a sheikh. The planet's been devastated by years of science fiction weapons. Everything on it is deadly. An ecosystem of alien-made death. It's a common issue with New Who, trying to make something or someone more impressive, but only making it dumber.
Toxic atmosphere, killer water. Very dangerous planet, Yaz.
An atmosphere is so toxic that they've no issues breathing whatsoever. The planet could have just been a regular desert planet, and the air they travel across could have had the same obstacles placed there deliberately. Same story, but less clearly ridiculous, because what they claim about the planet would line up with what we see. I did like the Doctor using Venusian Aikido. It's most connected with the third Doctor, but has popped up from time to time over the years. According to the books, the Doctor is one of the few beings with only 2 arms that managed to master it. The 2 racers are a selfish idiot with a very obvious plot arc, and a driven woman who's Northern Irish.
Whatever happens here, it's a better chance than I had back home.
The prize for the race is enough money to move them and their families to a safe planet. Why a safe planet? Because Zimshad's people have created the weapons that devastated this planet and have been causing trouble for the local systems. The spectre of a series plot arc begins. But it's comparatively innocuous and mainly limited to a few stories. The story goes downhill a bit when they get surrounded by deadly sniper robots in a deserted service station. Deadly sniper robots that can't aim, which are apparently firing bullets.
What's your better idea?
Outthink them.
You can't outthink bullets.
When they're clearly shooting lasers. And then the sentient bandages, which live in acetylene, start trying to kill them. I'm not sure if it makes it more or less ridiculous that they're voiced by Kevin Lannister from Game of Thrones.
Afraid of your own newness. We see deeper though, further back, the timeless child.
Boil in the bag enigmaticness. Ooh, something knows shit for no good reason, and it's making probing comments. Lazy drama. I'm very glad they get torched by an obvious setup.
They make them self-lighting. Just one click of the finger, and it lights itself.
Sometimes Chekhov's cigar is just Chekhov's cigar. By the way, they don't give an indication of dizziness, nausea, headaches, or any other side effects of breathing in acetylene. It could have been a weird alien gas that didn't affect humans but still combusted, but nah, they had to go with acetylene. So Ryan and Graham could remember facts about acetylene. Both the racers are declared the winner, but the Doctor gets the real prize, the TARDIS. I love the interior, but it kinda looks more like the Rani's than the Doctor's. And I really wish this had been saved for the series finale, and the whole series been a search for it, and to get the companions home. Sorta like a reverse early Pertwee crossed with the very beginning of Hartnell. This series had a unique setup and threw it away the second it was convenient. All in all, this is a less good episode. It had quality bits, still looks great. The plot is weak and the setting is ridiculous. The ending is obvious and Art Malik was wasted. Episode 3 is Rosa, the first celebrity historical for a while, and the first outright classic of the series. I'm not going to go through it like episodes 1 and 2, because I'd rather talk about its flaw that I've never seen anyone else talk about. Other than the fucking pop music dubbed over the ending that nearly ruined it. No, I'm talking about the villain Krasko. He's a white supremacist from the far future. They're a bit cagey as to when, but the 79th century was mentioned, so I'm going to go with that. He intends to stop Rosa Parks from kicking off the Montgomery bus boycott, because he views her refusal to stand up as the point when human civilization went downhill. Here's my issue. This presupposes that anti-black racism of the sort we have right now will last until the 79th century. A time when, according to other episodes, humanity is spread across the stars and interbred with aliens so much that there's not many pure humans left. A time when almost 3,000 years earlier, pansexuality became the norm because they were fucking aliens so much. Bigotry is a facet of culture, and like all culture, it evolves, and the sort of anti-black racism that Krasko espouses has its roots in the transatlantic slave trade. Bigotry has apparently always existed, and probably always will, but it changes with time and culture. I read about an interesting example of ancient Greek bigotry. I can't remember a reference, so discount it if you want, but whether it was real or not doesn't really matter. It's an illustration. The ancient Greeks viewed those pale people from the north of them as brave, but stupid, and the darker people to their south as smart, but cowardly. And being a mixture of the two, they saw themselves as being in the Goldilocks zone between those two extremes. The racism that is so horribly prevalent in our society would be totally alien to them, and they lived just over 2,000 years ago. The idea that a man from almost 6,000 years in the future would share one of our society's bigoted sicknesses is honestly ridiculous. He'd have his own shit that makes no fucking sense. Of course, that's not a nearly episode-breaking problem. No, that happens when you realize that by saying that modern anti-black racism continues into the 79th century, after all the cultural changes that by all logic should weed it out, or at least alter it, the episode is saying that it'll never leave us. that it's somehow intrinsic, which is horrifying. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think this was intended. It's just an example of someone not noticing a regretful side effect of what they wrote. It happens all the time. Anyway, please allow me to suggest a couple of possible alterations that keeps all the important and good stuff in the episode, but fixes the problem. Idea 1, have Krasko be an alien. Have it that in the far future, humanity is subjugated by an alien race, and kept as second-class citizens. Make parallels with real-world bigotry. Krasko reveals that eventually the human race managed to rise up and gain freedom by looking into the past and using examples such as Rosa Parks, and he's trying to undo that. Idea 2, and this is my preferred one. Krasko isn't a time traveller. He's a local racist from Montgomery. He met a time traveller who came back to meet Rosa Parks. He somehow found out about what's going to happen, and so decided to change history, killing the time traveller to make sure he couldn't stop him. Maybe he sent the traveller back to the time of the dinosaurs, therefore setting up what Ryan does to him at the end. Of course, you could argue that the point of sci-fi is to hold up a mirror, and this certainly does that. Rosa is mostly phenomenal. I just feel it didn't quite think itself through. From the sublime to the ridiculous. Arachnids in the UK is one of Series 11's most traditionally new Who episodes. The concept comes right from the same part of the brain as Russell Davies' pig monsters. Giant spiders, created from toxic waste thanks to evil Donald Trump / Howard Schultz stand-in. But before all that, we have a spectacular shot of a very festive time tunnel. I like the branching off network rather than straight tunnel. This episode introduces Yaz's family, and they're my favourite New Who family, though there's not that much competition. I was pretty mean to Bradley Walsh in episode 1, but he's great in this episode, dealing with being home for the first time since Grace's funeral. The CGI on the spiders is spectacular. It'd be good for a decently budgeted feature film, but the actual plot doesn't quite work. The idea that both Graham and Yaz's family would have direct connections to the giant spider invasion is a bit too much to be believable. I would have bought 1, but not 2. And the explanation as to why Sheffield spiders have started growing is very, very, very silly. Frankly, taking the classic Who route and making them aliens would have been better. And it's not helped by the fact that Earth spiders, as big as the smallest of the giant spiders, should be dead or dying. There's not enough oxygen in the air for spiders to grow that size. Not a big deal, but the spiders being unable to survive after growing is a plot point. They just decide that spiders need to become the size of a car before they start to die. The last issue with this episode is the worst. Somehow, the Doctor concludes that a slow death by suffocation, starvation, or cannibalism is less cruel than just shooting the spiders.
We're going to lure them in here with the promise of food, then deal with the spider mother in the ballroom.
You're going to let spiders use my panic room?
They deserve a humane, natural death.
Shooting's quicker.
This is the point when 13 doesn't just overtake 10 when it comes to guns, but laps him and throws up on his shoes. At the end of the episode, the companions come to the Doctor and ask to travel, and the Doctor tries to warn them away from it. That's unusual. I don't know if that was Chibnall trying something new with the character, or if that's him writing the Doctor as a woman. I really hope it's the former. To my mind, 13 should be written as the Doctor, and not written as the Doctor as a woman. Now the good, the CGI, obviously. The horror parts are handled very well. Chris Noth is hilarious as the series' biggest asshole. It's still wearing its politics in its sleeve by criticising gentrification, and like I said, I love Yaz's family. Overall, this is as silly as New Who gets, but it's also pretty dour and serious. It's a weird mix, like a kid's film nailed to a drama, and I really like it. It's not good, but I like it. Episode 5 is the Suranga Conundrum, and I'm not saying that title again. And I'll start out with the bad parts, because most people don't like this. They build up the monster only to reveal that it's a crap version of Stitch. I wish the future humans had been aliens, and it's a very bad sign when they're already reusing ideas for the 5th episode, i.e. losing the TARDIS and miraculously being saved in space. Back in the late 70s, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy did that once. It was a comedy, and the ship was being powered by a thing that literally made the unlikely happen. They've done it twice, in complete seriousness, without an infinite improbability drive. It's just weak writing. I really wish they'd take another draft to come up with another reason for them to be on board the hospital ship. I'm also not too impressed by the ship's propensity to explode. You'd think that of all the ships you'd want to avoid exploding, that hospital ships would be fairly high on the list. I mean, the monster eats some random stuff and it explodes. It bites something and launches an escape pod, and it explodes. If you try to override the automated destination, and it'll explode. Which makes you wonder why you can override it at all. And lastly, I'm annoyed by the convenience in some of the writing. Like the Sonic being damaged, but repairing itself just in the nick of time. It's cheap, and it really should have had another draft. Now for the uber controversial stuff, that shock horror I liked. We get great pieces of world building, from the biological android Crichton guy to the mind-controlled equipment, to the male pregnancy that upset all the right people online.
You know it's a boy?
Of course it is. Boys give birth to boys and girls give birth to girls. That's how it is.
Not where we come from.
Oh, how does that work?
They even use this as a jumping off point for some character detail about Ryan. I loved the evolution of names over the eons. The baby was called Avocado in the end. As recent of the Victorian era, people were named stuff like Phlegm, Mammy, and Author. I liked that the Doctor was impressed by General Cicero. Yes, she's military, and even classic Who the Doctor wasn't a fan, but this is the Doctor meeting a historical figure.
You're mentioned in the Book of Celebrants. You helped defeat the army of the Aeons at the Battle of the Underkind.
I was one of many.
And the Doctor loves them. Need I remind you that 3 boasted about being friends with Mao Zedong.
I remember once having a conversation with Zedong.
That is the personal name of our chairman, Mao Zedong.
He himself gave me leave to use it.
The Doctor spends a chunk of the episode being antsy to get back to the TARDIS. I almost put that into the stuff I didn't like, because there's no way scavengers are ever getting into the TARDIS. But she was harangued for being selfish and single-minded. Congratulations, episode, you had your cake and you ate it too. The episode tries to pull its 2 main problems together in a neat little bow, the monster and the bomb propensity to explode thing. And it kind of works, but I really wish it had been a piece of heavy-duty medical equipment like an MRI to fit the hospital theme, or an engine core or something. Anything to write at the remote detonation hospital. All in all, this reminds me of Russell the Davies story, just treating itself a bit more seriously. So, just like the last episode. There's something that I like that's not limited to this episode. Like the earliest stories in Classic Who, this series will drop actual information into the narrative. Stuff about how a particle accelerator works, facts about spiders or Rosa Parks. Hell, even the stuff about acetylene. The show is in its own little way helping to teach the audience, and I hope it keeps it up. Demons of the Punjab has a bunch in common with Rosa. They're both historicals but times of great upheaval. They both take place somewhere warm, they're both about bigotry, and they're both about something important to one of the companions' grandmothers. Unlike Rosa though, this is a probably accidental remake of the 12th Doctor's final story. Like this, it deals with beings that seek out the soon to die for a sinister seeming but ultimately benevolent reason. I'm really sad that this came out so soon after Twice Upon a Time because it blows it out of the water, and some of the impact is lost because it's easily mistaken for a rip-off. This is set during the partition of India and Pakistan, when millions of people were displaced and died because some British people drew a line on a map. Now, earlier New Who historicals tended to limit themselves to uncomplicated eras for its mostly British audience. This use of history that seeks to challenge the mostly British audience is yet another return to something from Classic Who. Not a very common thing from Classic Who, but something that happened. The Highlanders was set in the aftermath of the Battle of Culloden. The mainly English army of King George had wiped out the mainly Scottish rebel Jacobites, and in the aftermath mercilessly butchered the wounded, and instituted cultural and ethnic cleansing of the Highlands. And the story doesn't shy away from this. It's a pure historical, so there's no aliens. The villains are the British Army. The Highlanders face murder, transportation, indentured servitude in a colony, or the gallows. This episode's unvarnished look at a period of history where the British did bad stuff is not new. It's very old, and frankly, we should see it more often. This is an outstanding episode, and the aliens are easily the weakest part. Personally, I had preferred this to be a pure historical, but if the changes in Series 11 were too much for some people, I shudder to think what a story without any sci-fi would do to them. This is a big improvement over much of earlier New Who, not least because it sets up a tragedy that the main characters know is going to happen. Then piece by piece it does, and they don't even try to avoid it. Under Moffat or Davies, they would have at least tried to change history to get a happy ending, but not here. And I appreciate that. Next is KaBlam, and I have complicated thoughts. It's a good episode, a lot like a cross between 2 Tom Baker stories. The Robots of Death, which also featured an artificial intelligence being used for evil by a human villain. Though this wisely didn't feature the guy dressing up as a robot because he thought he was one. But the story it's most like is The Sunmakers, albeit a failed version of it. It was one of mid-era Tom Baker's best stories. Why is it so good? Many different factors. Like just about everything Robert Holmes wrote, it's witty and clever. It's nakedly political and it's got a challenging ending. The good and just revolution that brings down the evil government instantly starts massacring people, and innocents will die. Realistic stuff that Who doesn't usually touch. It's also unusually right-wing in its politics for Who, being fundamentally anti-tax, and inspired by Holmes getting pissed off at his tax bill. Now, KaBlam sometimes gets the wit down, but much less the cleverness. It got the unusually right-wing politics down by making the villain a left-wing activist, and making the ultimately benevolent system a neoliberal wet dream, but it studiously avoided the challenging ending. If the villain had succeeded with his plan and died in the attempt, they could have jumped forward a bit to find out that it worked better than he could have dreamed of. That humanity is free and he's lionized by a happy population who don't know what the horror he caused to make it happen. And the heroes have the uncomfortable knowledge that evil sometimes breeds good, in the same way that the Sunmakers had good breeding evil.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
Like I said, it's missing an actually challenging ending. The ending we get as the company continue giving a few more scraps of wage slave jobs to a few people, while most of the population live in squalor, encouraged to buy useless tat from the company that de facto rules them.
It's the least we can do.
It's literally the least you could do. The system in KaBlam is a gaping wound and they barely apply a bandage to it. It's not the first time that's happened in Who, but they're not usually so positive about the gaping wound in the end. Like I said earlier, classic Who wore its politics in its sleeves, and sometimes those politics were garbage. And New Who Series 11 is exactly the same. Now, you could say that KaBlam's ending is challenging, but I disagree. It's a simple ending that comes from the episode's politics, which are bullshit. Think about this, it starts with a help me message instead of product, something that has actually happened. But rather than the mistreated workers sending it, it's a computer. A computer that's being harmed by a guy who wants to help the workers. And the happy ending for those workers? Great new conditions that rival the shit conditions of today. The shit conditions of today that caused the original help me messages that inspired the episode. There's taking inspiration from the real world, and then there's this. Shitting on the pain that inspired your episode. The Witchfinders is a celebrity historical, a fairly silly and camp celebrity historical, which makes it the closest thing to an old school New Who story this year. Usually I'd be annoyed, but it's good New Who. Unlike Mummy and the Orient Express, with a little rewriting, this could have been a brilliant classic Who story. But while Mummy is totally an early 4th Doctor story, this was slotted in with 4's last series, or with 5 or 6. Alan Cumming delivers a tour de force performance as King James VI. James was the King of Scotland before he inherited the English crown. He might have been the first King James of England, but he was the 6th King James of Scotland. And I'm going to use the Scottish numbering system for various petty reasons, such as the Scottish crown jewels being much sexier than the English ones. I mean, look at that long, erect, sexy broadsword. And finally, because Bruce Wayne was partially named after a King of Scotland, Robert the Bruce. So I think you'll agree that the Scottish crown is far cooler than the English. Cummings as King James is New Who's first, honest-to-goodness, scenery-devouring guest star that could stand toe-to-toe with Soldeed.
My dreams of conquest!
Zaroff.
Nothing in the world can stop me now!
Anyone played by Stephen Thorne.
I alone, Omega!
Morgana.
They breed their children strong on this world. No matter.
King Yakarnos. And the Captain.
Now, by the Sky Demon, I say no!
I'm sorry about the noise. He does so enjoy his work.
Just go! Just go!
While I love him, I have a slight issue with his performance. While King James VI was very, very, very gay, him and Edward II are thought to be the only gay men ever to sit on the English throne, but he was also much more of a butch gay.
And what is your field of expertise, my Nubian prince?
Paperwork mostly, Your Majesty.
Paper? How fascinating. We should talk.
Alan Cummings' James strikes me as more similar to Charles I, James's son and successor, who was camp straight, and was once played with unexpected butchness by Peter Capaldi. Cummings' choice of accent is also far more like Charles than James. James's tongue was too large for his mouth, it made drinking and speaking difficult, and he had a thick Scottish accent, while Charles was softly spoken with a light Scottish accent. James was fairly dedicated to fighting the powers of darkness. He wrote a book on demonology, a subject that included witches, vampires, werewolves, and more. Shakespeare wrote Macbeth to directly appeal to him. He even used James's book for research. James was behind the famous King James Bible, which was the first version of the book to include the admonishment to not suffer a witch to live. Anyway, on to the rest of the episode. The mud zombies look great. Well, except for the bosses, they're awful. Their origin is very, very silly, and so is their plan. But it fits with the overwhelming tone of the story and series. Dour and serious, but with very well realised ridiculous stuff. This story in particular is like a Russell T Davies story with the brightness turned down. And not just literally. It Takes You Away is probably the most controversial episode of the series, and weirdly enough, I don't hate it as much as most people. It's not perfect, but I can defend chunks of it. Really, it's 3 stories that meander into each other. The intro from a solid Series 11 story, the mid-part from an okay but not great Russell T Davies story, and the finale from whatever someone wrote after snorting fumes and banging their head in a Moffat script. The thing it reminded me of most was Warrior's Gate from the E-Space trilogy in Tom Baker's era. What with the interdimensional travel, the void, and attempts to visualize stuff that really can't be visualized. The Solitract is beyond silly, and the Doctor's attempt to feed it memories is basically a rerun of the Rings of Aten, which was also silly. I think the Solitract would have worked a bit better if it had featured something extra. Another Doctor. Think about this, the Solitract wants to trap people. The Doctor usually can't remember what happened in multi-Doctor stories until they happen to the older Doctor. So if the Solitract wanted to make the Doctor stay, all it had to do was pretend to be a previous Doctor who got trapped. She would assume that she helped him escape and would hopefully stay long enough to actually get trapped. It'd work even better if the Doctor had previously encountered the Solitract, but because it's so weird, she remembered it like a dream, so she's a bit hazy about what happened, allowing the Solitract to perfectly recreate the Doctor who'd been there previously. You could even work this into the theme of loss by choosing a previous Doctor with some pathos to mine. This would avoid the need to have the supposed emotional finale be between Whittaker and a frog. I'm fine with the surrealism. My favourite Who story is The Mind Robber, the single most surreal Doctor Who story ever made, but that frog doesn't work. Now that I've complained and suggested, I'd like to defend the crappy cavern, Moss and Kevin Eldon as Zathras from Babylon 5 a bit. It's not a very cheap corridor between dimensions inhabited by beings that shouldn't exist. It's part of the Solitract. It's created threats and a person who can use a carrot, a stick, or any other means to convince anyone who enters the mirror to go to the heart of the Solitract, where it's strongest. And with the fictional danger in the caverns, you're happy when you make it. You feel safe and are less likely to leave because you don't want to face the danger again. The flesh moths are apparently dangerous, and yet they don't actually kill anyone from outside the dimension. The deadbeat dad possibly spent hours in there before he found his way through the first time. The Doctor, Yaz, and Graham don't get harried until they're next to the portal to the Solitract. Ryan and Hannah, who's blind, have no real trouble with him at all. They're either the single worst monsters in Who history, or they're a trick. Anyway, the stuff with Graham and Grace was very good. It was nice and affecting, and it just reminds me of how I wish they hadn't killed her off. They should have probably done the resurrected dead in a weird eldritch location thing as a separate story. Having the concept be the centre of a triple-decker storyline sandwich doesn't do it justice. All 3 parts of this would actually work better as separate stories. The first one, a girl alone in a lodge in Norway and there's a monster outside. The second, the place that holds the dead who don't know how they got there. And third, a collection of surrealism. If done well, those are great. The Mind Robber rules. There's a speech given by the Doctor about how the universe can't exist with the Solitract present. That for both it and our universe to function properly, they need to be separate things. She could be talking about this story's structure.
Our reality cannot work with Solitract energy present. The most basic ideas of the universe just get ruined. Our universe cannot work with the Solitract in it.
Anyway, the Doctor mentions having 7 grandmothers, and because I'll grab hold of anything, I'll take that as a reference to the Looms, because the Looms are awesome, and are Who canon according to me, and as we all know, that's the only canon that matters, because I said so. And would I lie? Or be wrong? Yes, I would be wrong, but I'm not, because I'm as awesome as the Looms. The Looms are a concept from pre-New Who novels that Gallifreyans aren't born but created from genetic looms. Each member of a family will donate some DNA and the loom will create a new family member from all the DNA, creating someone who's related to all of them.
A bedtime story my gran used to tell me. You had a grandmother? I had 7, but Granny 5, my favourite, used to tell me about the Solitract.
Now, in the books, this makes all Gallifreyans in a family cousins to each other, but meh. This whole episode is full of wild, interesting ideas that don't gel. Other ideas that are dropped and others that don't get time to breathe. And the less said about the cavern with its hilarious giant moths, a balloon with a glow stick inside, and Zathras, the better. This is an experiment. It didn't work much, but I'm glad they made it. It shows a bravery that I wish earlier showrunners had more often. The series finale is the Battle of Ranskoor af Kolos, and the less said about that title the better, so I'm moving on to everything but it. This, like a bunch of other stories, has direct parallels with classic Who. In this case, Logopolis, what with the religious or religious-adjacent people, influencing reality in a psychic way via their devotions, and the pirate planet, what with a twat stealing planets for reasons of plot. We have the return of Zimsha, and I think limiting the arc to episodes 1, 10, and a tiny mention in 2 was a wise decision. Not as wise as dropping it entirely, but beggars can't be choosers. The way the stanza, Zimsha's people, were handled in episode 1 and 2 seemed to be setting up a broader conflict between the Empire and the Doctor. What with their horrible stuff beyond Predatoring getting some random mentions in episode 2, it falls a bit flat to just have another fight with Zimsha. We get more sanctimonious Doctor stuff as she tells Graham that if he tries to kill Zimsha in revenge for killing Grace, he won't be able to travel with her anymore. I'm very glad that rule wasn't in place when Leela was aboard, as she was a fucking serial killer.
Our rules change all the time.
Nice try, show. This is a pretty generic and underwhelming story. Zimsha pretends to be a god, convinces some psychic aliens to do his bidding, captures planets, and threatens the Earth. Ho-hum. The Earth-threatening part makes it even worse. It's a half-hearted Russell Davies finale cover version. I don't like his finales. I intend to do 20 Who's in most of them, but they went all in. This is more like a shrug. I'm not complaining that this isn't a barnstormer of a finale, that the narrative of the series doesn't build to a crescendo. I don't think that Who benefits from being structured like most shows these days with season arcs. My issue is that it's just meh. Even the stakes don't make much sense. Zimsha is collecting planets, and if he has too many of them together, the technology holding them in tiny stasis will fail and destroy the universe. It's a handful of planets, and one of them is the Earth. Destroy only the planets, and the Earth is just as destroyed. The universe thing is both nonsensical and utterly pointless from a narrative POV. It's like a desperate attempt to convince us that this is a traditional big New Who finale. The episode seems to be setting up the Doctor facing down her current rule about killing, what with Zimsha only being here because she spared him, but it's abandoned. Really, this whole script need another draft or two. The guy who played Zimsha was good. He's still pretty nifty looking with his mask on, and his voice is cool. And Mark Addy's doing all kinds of acting, but this is weak. Not quite 20 Who level, but weak. Okay, whole series thoughts. I thought this was one of the better New Who series is. Series 11 is like a bunch of classic Who elements, most of which haven't come up in New Who, stuck into a blender. I'm a simple person, give me stuff from classic Who and I'm often happy. I'm such a caricature that if you remade a random episode of New Who with cardboard sets and upper-class actors slumming it, I'd probably prefer it to the real New Who. I've been reading reviews and comments about the series as I've been rewatching the episodes, and I've come to the conclusion that my taste in Who is just fundamentally different from most everyone else's. I loved the lack of glibness, the more serious tone, the washed out colours, the science and history info dumps, the politics, even the shit politics like KaBlam. Hell, I even like Chibnall as a showrunner. The problem is when he writes as well. I'm not in love with 13, but that puts her on the same level as 5, 8, 9, and 10. So, she's good company. If Series 12 is as political as Series 11, and based about what I've read, it probably won't be, I really hope they do a third Peladon story inspired by Brexit, because that would just be perfect. Anyway, next up is my first Whittaker 20 Who.